When traveling our network of freeways today, we rarely give thought to pioneers who once inhabited this ground without such infrastructure. The beautiful desert-like expanse that we were traveling through on our way to San Bernardino and the town of Colton was settled long ago by intrepid pioneers who trekked across the plains to settle here on this flat expanse bordered by arid mountains. Among them who settled here were the Earps, parents of Wyatt Earp and brothers Morgan and Virgil, who will forever be linked to the deadly gunfight in Tombstone, Arizona in 1881. Their son spent time here as well.
Hi, so welcome to this episode of History Hunters. I'm here at Hermosa Gardens Cemetery in Rialto, California, or San Bernardino, California, because a number of you had watched my Wyatt Earp death house video and the place where he had his funeral in Los Angeles. You told me that the body of Morgan Earp, his brother, who was shot and killed in Tombstone, Arizona, is buried here, and we decided to come out here today. Now, it just so happens that today is March 18th, 2022, which is the 140th anniversary of the shooting death of Morgan Earp. He's buried right over here. I'm going to tell you all about it on this episode of History Hunters. The truth is that Morgan hasn't been buried here the whole time. For about 10 years, he was buried over in the Slover Mountain Cemetery, which is over in that direction. And my understanding is that the cemetery was moved over here because there was a railroad right-of-way that was established, went right through the cemetery. I also heard that there were some mining efforts that destroyed the cemetery afterwards. And in 1892, his body was relocated to this spot right here. So he's been in this ground right here for well over 120 years. Donated by the Southern California Paraders Association of 1991, and somebody has set some coins on top of his grave. And you'll see right there, it says, in memory of Morgan Earp, dedicated March 18th, 2013 by the Colton Police Department, in recognition of 125 years of law enforcement service. U.S. Deputy Marshal Morgan S. Earp, born 1851, assassinated in Tombstone, Arizona, March 18th, 1882. I would assume that all of you know the whole story of what happened at Tombstone. The Earp brothers were having a feud with the Cowboys, and in October of 1881, there was the OK Corral shooting, in which two of the McClory brothers and Mr. Clanton were shot and killed by Wyatt Earp and Morgan Earp and Virgil Earp. And the tensions between the Earps and the Cowboys ran high for about 5 months. Now, on the night of March 18th, 1882, the Earp brothers went to a play there in Tombstone, and then they decided to play some pool at Campbell and Hatch's saloon. Sometime around midnight, a shot rang through the window, shot and killed Morgan Earp. You probably all knew that story if you've all watched Tombstone. You see how he was mortally wounded. He was shot in the back.
Hold him. No, get her out of here, Jesus!
It was Wyatt Earp's biographer, Stuart Lake, who reported that Wyatt told him that him and Morgan used to have conversations about what dying people saw, some of the visions of heaven. And reportedly, as Morgan was dying there on the pool table or inside the pool hall, he whispered to Wyatt that he saw nothing, saw no vision of heaven. Not sure what that meant. Of course, after Morgan was shot and killed, his brother Virgil and his wife escorted the body back here to Colton, California to be buried next to where his parents lived. This was his hometown. In fact, Virgil was the first marshal of Colton, California, which is the town that we're now in.
Morgan Earp survived a gunshot wound in the celebrated gunfight at the OK Corral. However, he was outright murdered 4 months later, it is widely believed, out of retribution for the shooting deaths of members of the Cowboys, Tom and Frank McClory and Billy Clanton. Prosecutors could not prove who killed Morgan Earp, so nobody was convicted. Knowing there would be no justice in the court system for his brother's murder, Wyatt Earp avenged his death by forming a posse to chase down and murder members of the Cowboys. Morgan Earp's funeral was not held in a church, but in the Cosmopolitan Hotel in Tombstone. Morgan's body was laid in the coffin, dressed in a blue suit belonging to Doc Holliday. The Earps wanted Morgan buried in Colton near his parents, so his body was loaded onto a wagon escorted by Virgil and Allie Earp and James and Bessie Earp. Wyatt and his deputies shadowed the group to ensure the safety of the party to the train station. The body was transferred to the train station in Contention, Arizona. During a train stop in Tucson, Arizona, Wyatt Earp spotted Cowboys member Frank Stillwell, who apparently was lying in wait to murder Virgil. However, Stillwell, who was a suspect in Morgan's cowardly murder, was shot by 5 different guns, one of them belonging to Wyatt Earp. Today, a statue of Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday marks the spot of the 1880s Tucson depot where Frank Stillwell was gunned down. Wyatt Earp did not answer for his act of vigilantism.
I never thought I'd be out here dodging sprinklers on the 140th anniversary of the shooting death of Morgan Earp. Now, interestingly, I just discovered something right over here, trying to dodge another sprinkler, but this marker caught my eye. It talks about the great train wreck of 1907. In memory of those who perished in the great train wreck of the Sunset Express happened at the Colton Railroad Yard, March 28, 1907. Among the 24 who died, 18 were Italian immigrants traveling from Genoa, Italy to jobs awaiting them in San Francisco, some of whom are buried in this area where you now stand. And then it lists the Italians who passed away here. So I want to go right over here and check out this grave that stands out. It is the grave of Wilford Kenyon. He was the superintendent of a gold mine up in Randsburg in Kern County when he dropped dead at the age of 32. Nobody knows why. And I think that right over there is a hospital.
A word about Morgan's widow, Louisa Houston Earp. She was not in Tombstone at the time of Morgan's shooting, but was with the Earps in Colton. It seems that Morgan wanted her to stay safe away from the potential violence in Tombstone, and to stay safe, he sent her away to Colton to be with his parents. The loss of Morgan left Louisa a heartbroken woman. She wrote on March 22, 1882, quote, "It is so hard to give up the most dearest of all to the earth. But death there is no disputing, no bringing back. He was so generous, so charitable. He has always had so many friends. God is just too just to let his murderers go unpunished, whoever they are." After the death of her husband, Louisa lived in Southern California but separated from the Earp family. In December 1885, she married Gustav Peters, although the marriage lasted only a few years. She was in poor health for the rest of her life and died at the age of 39 on June 12, 1894. She is buried in the Evergreen Cemetery in Los Angeles.
I can only assume that the original marker for Morgan Earp was stolen. You know, his brother Wyatt Earp's marker up in Colma, California had been stolen at least 3 times. And the present marker that's there today is not the marker that was there originally. So I think what we're going to do right now is go off to some other cemeteries in this area and show you where some other Earp family members are buried. And we're also going to pass by the house where the Earps reportedly lived on West H Street in Colton. So we have made it over here to West H Street and 4th Street, and right down the street is the alleged Earp house. I believe that Nicholas Earp and his wife lived here at the time that Morgan Earp was killed in Tombstone. The body was brought out here. We tried to find some information on it. We're not too sure who lived in this house. It's possible that Virgil lived here at one time. Now the curious thing is we spoke to some friends in the real estate business who know how to look things up. We gave them the address of this house, and it came back as being built in 1976. I'm going to show you the house. There's no way that this house was built in 1976. Possibly renovated then, but not originally built. Looks like duplexes right here, right next to this house. And this is 538 West H Street. Supposedly the Earp house. Now take a look at that house and tell me it was built in 1976. No way. This has to be the original Earp house. 528 West H Street. Look at that gingerbread trim. I'm surprised that this isn't on the National Register of Historic Places. The town of Colton itself was founded in 1875 and incorporated in 1887. It was laid out when the Southern Pacific Railroad was constructed. Nicholas Earp owned the Gem Saloon while he was a city clerk for Colton. In fact, Wyatt Earp had applied to City Hall to operate a gambling hall in Colton, but was turned down. The Earp family settled here in 1877, and Nicholas Earp was elected as the recorder in 1887, which is the same year that Virgil Earp was elected as the first marshal of Colton. So I think that's pretty cool to know that possibly Wyatt Earp had visited his parents here, and that possibly the body of Morgan Earp had been brought here after he was assassinated in Tombstone back in 1882. So we come over to the Pioneer Historic Cemetery in San Bernardino, where we're going to find a couple more graves associated with the Earp family. Underneath this charred tree, it looks like the tree's been caught on fire. Are two of the family members, specifically the mother of Wyatt Earp, Virginia Ann Cooksey Earp, is right here. She lived from 1821 to 1893, beloved wife of Nicholas P. Earp, beloved mother of James, Virgil, Martha, Wyatt, Morgan, Warren, Virginia, and Adelia. Newton is the stepson. Newton, of course, is buried in Sacramento, California. This is the second wife of Nicholas Earp and the mother of Wyatt Earp. It's hard to believe she's buried here. In this pretty ghetto neighborhood, this cemetery is surrounded by a very poor section of San Bernardino County. We encountered a lot of homeless people coming in here, some homeless camps. The cemetery doesn't look too bad, but there's a lot of old historic graves here as well. Now this is interesting because this says FHC. I'm not sure who the C is. Maybe it's Cooksey. But right here is also a daughter-in-law, Bessie. James Earp's first wife was Bessie Earp. She was born in New York. She's also the mother of Frank and Hattie Ketchum Land. Frank being killed by the Apaches in Cochise County, Arizona in 1891, and Hattie became the wife of a very powerful cattle baron, William Land of Douglas, Arizona. Bessie married James Cooksey Earp in Illinois in 1873, and she spent her entire life with him from Illinois through her final days in California. She was known as a sporting woman and ran a sporting house in Wichita, Kansas, which was basically Madame Prostitute relationship. She was a soiled dove, in other words. She was present during the more turbulent times of Tombstone, being witness in the aftermath of the OK Corral gunfight, as well as the murder of her brother-in-law, Morgan Earp. And unlike other women of her time, Bessie was a very independent and enterprising woman. She was also a single parent before she met James. Bessie left Tombstone for California with the other Earp wives in 1882 after the OK Corral aftermath, and certainly after the tragic death of Morgan Earp as well. She remained here in the San Bernardino, Colton area until her death. Now, curiously, Bessie was called the beautiful brunette by her husband, James. She's buried here right next to her mother-in-law, Virginia Ann Cooksey Earp, and that looks like a more recent tombstone over here. While the cemetery does look rather nice, the fact that Wyatt Earp's mom is buried right here with not much of a directional signage at all, no directional signage at all actually, you would never know to look for it right here. Just think about the historical significance of this woman giving birth to so many children, three of them being very well-known Western folklore people, Virgil Earp, Wyatt Earp, and Morgan Earp. Right here. Nobody knows she's here. Mrs. Earp's grave's right over here, but look, there's a couple of Civil War graves right here in the dust. Looks like Eliza S. Gusterhout, 1839 to 1930, and then J.D. Osterhout, Company D of the 1st California Cavalry. Check it out. Laying in the dirt. It's now the grave of Annie Elizabeth Cadd Earp, who was the third wife of Nicholas Earp, which was Wyatt Earp's stepmom then. She's also buried out here. I don't know where it is. There's no GPS coordinates for it, and there's nobody that's able to tell me where her grave is located. I couldn't help but notice this one for Ann Miller. Looks like she died in 1870 something, 23. Her headstone is rather large, but it's full and cracked underneath this giant cork tree. It looks like a giant cork tree. And right over here we have some Canadian geese that are finding some refuge in this area because nobody comes out here. You find some friends to feed?
Yeah, do you think geese like cauliflower?
Do you think they do?
I don't know, but here come more. Look.
You want to throw it? I don't think he's interested in eating it. Do you attract birds or animals?
Do I attract them?
Yeah.
With food? Well, not with cauliflower.
No, they were here before the food came out.
The birds weren't right here before I threw food at them. And the geese just came in. They just landed here.
If you visit the Mountain View Cemetery here in San Bernardino, you will not find any directional signs here to the siblings of Wyatt Earp. It's pretty easy to find the grave of James Earp. You have to look for the Mountain View Mausoleum. Use Taylor, the marker there, for your guide. He's right here. This is the brother of Wyatt Earp, Morgan Earp, Virgil Earp. He died in 1926. So that was 3 years before Wyatt passed away. And right over here you'll find the sister of Wyatt Earp, who was Adelia Edwards. She lived from 1861 to 1941.
Also buried here in this plot is Elvira Packingham Sullivan Earp, the common-law wife of Virgil Earp. Allie was a very old woman when she passed away on October 14, 1947 in Los Angeles. The other woman buried here is none other than Adelia Earp, her sister-in-law, who had died in 1941 at the age of 79. Virgil met Allie in 1874 when she was a waitress in Council Bluffs, Iowa. They were never married, but remained together for the rest of their lives. The Earp brothers were close and often relocated together to seek a better life. Virgil and Allie spent time in Dodge City, Kansas in 1877 with his younger brother Wyatt. During the celebrated gunfight at OK Corral, Virgil sustained a shot through his calf muscle but survived. 2 months later, he was shot in an ambush and permanently lost the use of his arm. During the operation, he told Allie, "Don't worry, I will have one good arm to hug you." Allie had outlived all the Earps and at the time of her passing was probably 98 years old. She claimed that her birth was in 1847, but historians believe it was more like 1851. Her ashes were interred here with the remains of her sister-in-law, Adelia, the sister of Wyatt Earp. James Earp was a Western figure in his own right. He was born in Hartford, Kentucky in 1841 as the eldest of the Earp brothers. When the Civil War broke out, he enlisted in the Union Army's 17th Illinois Infantry. During an 1861 battle in Fredericktown, Missouri, James was shot in the shoulder and temporarily lost the use of his left arm, but he stayed in the Army for another year. He was discharged in March 1863 as disabled. After the war, James traveled through several states before settling in Dodge City, Kansas in 1876. There, he was appointed as deputy sheriff under legendary lawman Charlie Bassett, who also had established the famous Long Branch Saloon, the same saloon mentioned prominently in the Gunsmoke TV series. As a side note, Bassett also served on the Dodge City Peace Commission with Wyatt Earp, who was James Earp's brother. James roamed throughout Missouri, Arkansas, and Texas, where he found work in saloons and as a stage and wagon driver. When the Earp brothers moved to Tombstone in 1879, James joined them, but he did not involve himself in law enforcement or the shootout at the OK Corral. He did, however, participate in the well-publicized Earp vendetta ride. When Brother Morgan was killed, James joined Virgil and other family members on the train journey to deliver the body to Colton. The year 1884 found him mining in Shoshone County, Idaho, before permanently relocating back to California in 1890. He died of natural causes in San Bernardino in 1926. He was 84 years old and died 3 years before Wyatt Earp passed away It is possible and indeed likely that Wyatt Earp stood over this grave here.
You will not find any directional signs pointing out the graves of James Earp and Adelia Earp Edwards. I think it would serve the purposes of historical interest if they did have signs here. We visited the cemetery in Carson City, Nevada, and they had historical markers and signs all over the place pointing out where historical people were buried, such as the famous stagecoach driver Hank Monk. We found him. A couple of governors of Nevada were also buried there. But you won't find any signs here pointing out some really interesting people.
Nicholas Earp lived out another 26 years after Morgan's murder. In fact, he outlived 6 of his 10 children. He died at the Soldiers' Home in the Sawtelle area of Los Angeles on February 12, 1907, shortly after he was elected to the Los Angeles County Court. He is buried in the Los Angeles National Cemetery.
So I think that's going to wrap up this episode of History Hunters. We appreciate you getting to the end, and we hope that you really enjoyed learning a little bit more about the Earp family. I know that in researching this subject and coming across some of the photographs, I learned some new things as well. We would love it if you left us a comment, maybe telling us what stood out about this video to you. And also if you could hit the like button, tell your friends about History Hunters. We are trying to expand our influence in the YouTube world by entertaining and educating. Thank you so much.